So, thank you again for being on the show. Let's go ahead and dive right into our next segment, which is... excuse me, everybody. Ladies and gentlemen, we now present you another episode of #TV Guideposts, presented to you by The Fear of God, in which we are making our way through Season 2 of Ash vs. Evil Dead. Things are about to get real crazy as Ash goes head-to-head with the wicked demon Baal in some wild, outrageous, delusional episodes. We have a very special guest with us this week, and we want to invite you to sit back, relax, and enjoy this installment of TV Guideposts.
It's so lovely when you do that, Reed. Just makes me...
It's
very soothing.
It's so
Thank you.
soothing.
Thank you.
The little music backing you up. It's glorious.
It's one of my new favorite segments of the show. It's pretty nice. It's pretty nice.
I feel like I'm like either in like a bookstore or like an airport bathroom. Like I don't know. It's just real.
Wow, I would not
calming.
equate bookstore and airport bathroom. Like when I think of calming places, I was thinking
that was more with the voiceover talking narration, but the nice calm voice. So that
please proceed to your gate.
Exactly. See,
calmly walk.
if you leave your baggage unattended, you will be arrested.
Oh, that's true. Wow. Yes. I'm not gonna go where my mind was going.
Hey, whatever.
Oh, so
I feel like I know exactly where your mind is going.
You probably do. So we're going to be talking about Ash vs. Evil Dead, specifically Season 2, Episodes 6, 7, and 8. But before we get there, we have a special guest. Vera, we invited you in kind of in media race with these, Ash vs. Evil Dead segments. But I am understanding that you have quite the fandom with Ash vs. Evil Dead. I've seen pictures of things. Why don't you talk a little bit about your history just with the films, the show, anything and everything about your experience with Ash vs. Evil Dead?
I've been a fan of the Evil Dead trilogy since high school. Something that me and my friends in high school, we watched a ton over and over again. And Bruce Campbell has been my favorite actor since then, basically. And nobody knows who he is, and I have to explain who he is every single time, but I just think he's hilarious, and I appreciate his body of work. I'm a really big fan of cheesy horror and just cheese in general.
Yeah.
The food and the media. So when it became a TV show, I was really excited about that as well. And I don't mean to name drop, but I interpret at I'm a sign language interpreter, and I interpret at Fan Expo, which is like our San Diego Comic-Con in Toronto. And I had the opportunity to meet and interpret for Bruce Campbell a bunch of times. Yeah.
That is so awesome. Is he as wonderful in person as we would like to hope he is from all of his work?
Yes, absolutely. So I did his his game show on Con TV.
Yeah, I've heard of that. Yes.
So I interpreted the game show. They had one of those at Fan Expo a couple years back, and a couple of panels with him, and one joint panel between him and Ted Raimi.
Oh wow.
That was great.
That's awesome.
Essentially, they did a segment called You Are the Panel, where they just called people in the audience on stage to showcase their talents, and it just turned into audience members beating Ted Raimi with whatever cosplay weapons they had brought with them that day, and it was hilarious.
That's so great. Oh my gosh, that's awesome. And you and Rob went to the Evil Dead musical, did you not? Spider Zone style?
I've been to Evil Dead the musical 5 or 6 times. I've lost count.
Welcome home, Vera. That's awesome. That's fantastic. That's
and 3
great.
times in the splatter section, 3 times not in the splatter section. The last time, I think I sent a picture to the Fear of God podcast group, but that was the most covered in blood I've ever been. we walked around the street in Toronto afterwards, and people were like crossing over to the other side. They were concerned.
That's awesome.
That's amazing. Yeah,
you're
in good company here.
Oh, that's so awesome.
Now, Vera, have you watched the series more than once, or like have you watched it once and you kind of refreshed a little bit for this conversation?
I watched it once and then rewatched it for this conversation.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Did you rewatch? Now, there's no pressure either way on this answer. Did you rewatch just sort of the episodes we're going to be covering here in a moment, or did you sort of want to get a scope for the whole entire series beforehand? Either answer is acceptable, obviously.
I went back to episode 1.
Oh, that's fantastic. Because, see, I love this. I mean, like, I've said this to Nathan multiple times.
I'm worried I'm not going to have a role on the show by the time this conversation's done.
I mean, I love this show so much. Now, I know you have had your fandom, you've already expressed that, and your fandom extends back further than my affection for the Evil Dead trilogy, though I do enjoy them quite a bit. Ash versus Evil Dead, when it came on, I was expecting kind of the same level of affection and appreciation that I had for the films, which is respect, admiration, genuine enjoyment, but they're kind of in a pocket for me. But Ash versus Evil Dead quickly rose. I mean, like, this is a show, this is the culture we live in, how this is a measure of my affection for it. This is a show that is available and has been readily available on Netflix, but when able to, I purchased it all, because I just enjoy it that much and wanted to revisit it, and so I've been so excited that we're getting into it. I just love this iteration. Final question before we get into the specifics of the show: where does Ash versus Evil Dead sit in the overall scope of, like, the trilogy? Like, where, what's the creme de la creme of Evil Dead material, if you will?
So for me, it's it's so hard. I'd say Army of Darkness.
Okay.
Then the TV series, then Evil Dead 1, Evil Dead 2.
Gotcha.
But I love Evil Dead 2.
Oh, sure, of course. Even the bottom is going to be, thought of fondly. I understand.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, without further ado, let's dig into the specifics. The first episode up here, titled Trapped Inside. Nathan, Vera and I have been, waxing poetic about Evil Dead for a while. Why don't you give us your impressions of this particular episode first?
Sure. It's been a couple days since I've watched this, I think, and I'm a decent chunk ahead of here, so I'm refreshing myself. But I do think this sentence in my notes, or this pair of sentences in my notes, could speak more of the whole series and not just this episode. But my notes right now just say, "Poor Pablo, this sucks."
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Now, is this when they're doing the incantations and stuff on him in the upper part of Ash's house? Is that what I'm thinking of?
Not for for Trapped Inside. Yes, that they're trying to sort of call forth the book, sort of accelerate the process of the joining of him with the Necronomicon, so that they can finally receive the spell that's gonna. Man, this is so complicated if listeners have not watched the show. They're trying to call forth the spell so that it'll be visible on his body for them to banish Baal back to the underworld.
Right. Yeah. I mean, generally speaking, like I think I said last week, when Reed, you and I discussed this, I mean, personally, I think after season 1, which isn't bad, I think the show just continues to increase in quality. And so this whole little run here, as part of that, that is, I think, finishing off the arc in his house, in Ash's house, that then pivots into the kind of mental institution or the
right.
asylum, whatever it is. But no, I mean, I really enjoyed this. Now, they pretty directly address what is pretty, one of the most infamous scenes in the franchise, that of the tree scene from the first film.
Oh, they do.
I was like, well, there you go.
I literally wrote down in my notes, quote, branch banged, end quote, is just about the most unsettling way you can phrase the Cheryl Tree scene in Evil Dead 1. Oh, except for, quote, make like a tree and F you.
Yes, exactly. It's crazy.
Intense. It's intense.
And Nathan, I don't know if you would have known this, Vera, I'm sure you did. Cheryl is the original actor who played the same role in the original Evil Dead film. They brought her back.
I did not know that. It's funny because it did ping with me, like I wonder if it was, and then I think I just forgot to look it up.
Yep.
That's cool.
Yeah, it was the same one. And she has had, I don't know what she did in the, like, if you looked at her IMDb credit, it's pretty much like Evil Dead and then a large gap until she shows up in like a couple of indie horror films and then shows up back in Ash versus Evil Dead as Cheryl.
Right.
Vera, what notes do you have, if any, specifics on this episode other than that infamous tree?
A lot of mine are things that I just kind of noticed in the episode. I wrote down, it's going to sound kind of mean, and I don't mean it to be super mean, but it says that the actor who plays Ball, I thought was Matthew Lillard at first, and I thought he had not aged well.
I kept thinking he was Brad Dourif until I saw him in the light, and I was like, oh yeah, that's not him. Yeah.
But then it turns out it's kind of like a mini Xena reunion because he played Discord. Discord? No, he was Strife. Strife was the guy.
Oh, that's crazy. I never would have pinked that. That's really hysterical. It does seem like Bruce Campbell and Lucy Lawless are like constantly bringing their friends from Xena days in on this. And Bruce Campbell wasn't even in Xena that much. But
no,
that is pretty cool.
Supporting role as Autolycus, but I guess lifelong friendships.
Yeah.
But she's married to Robert Tapert, who was the producer on that, so then that makes sense. He produced all of the Evil Deads as well.
Gotcha. I did not know that factoid. That's fascinating. Okay, that makes a lot of sense now.
I love when a plan comes together. It really did not click with me that we were getting the Encyclopedia Brown of the Evil Dead series in Vera. I mean, there were so many other benefits you brought to this conversation. It did not click with me just how much we were going to get out of you on this. So that's awesome. I just, maybe in the spirit of that, I think my favorite line from this episode is Kelly DiPablo, where she just says, "There's my powerful vagina." I thought that was great.
It's so awesome. I really do like the dynamic that's developed between Kelly and Pablo. Like it really sort of solidifies this, very affectionate brother-sister kind of thing that they've got going on. Speaking of that, though, I've got a note here. So Ash says to Kelly at one point, "You're like the daughter I never had." What's interesting about that is that there was a plot line that was in development, toyed around with during this season. It was later abandoned and slightly modified, where Kelly was actually going to be revealed to be Ash's daughter.
Really?
Yes. And it was. There's a lot of apocryphal information about why it was abandoned. Some reports say that it was because Dana De Lorenzo and Bruce Campbell thought it really wouldn't be a good idea. Some people thought that the writers and producers just sort of pivoted away from it. But whatever it was, it is confirmed that they were toying with that notion for a while and ultimately abandoned and kind of modified the ideas that they would have explored through that for season 3.
Yeah, I'm glad they didn't do that.
I'm okay with them not Skywalkering it. Not everybody has to be related all the time.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. Well, before we get into our next episode, did anybody else have anything about Trapped Inside specifically?
I love how angry and sardonic Kelly has gotten in season 2 especially. It's great. And I thought that the picture crying before Cheryl comes back to life was a pretty cool practical effect.
Oh, yes, I remember that. And that's one of the things I really appreciate about this show. This show knows how to do, and I've heard in some of the behind-the-scenes things, they actively sought out what's a way we can do a different, fun, cool, practical effect. They really just dug their heels in on this is the way we want this show to be, in the spirit of how the franchise was before there were all these, CG-saturated opportunities. That's awesome.
Yeah, I love that. And my last note is, and it kind of leads into the next episode, was that the end credit music is always on point, and the end credit music in this episode was about an insane asylum, and they're like, it was a little jaunty tune that was like, "They're coming to take me away," and then
that's right.
He wakes up in the next episode and he's in a mental hospital, and I was like, that's awesome.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, and you're right. That I am impressed probably most in season 3, but throughout the run of the show with their choices of soundtrack. They're really very intentional about it, and it's obvious. So that's great. Let's go ahead and pivot into our next episode, which is called Delusion. I'm going to lead with one note right here and then bounce around a little bit. For reasons I cannot justify in any sane way, just love the Ashy Slashy puppet. That puppet is outrageous and hysterical and so wrong and yet oh so right. He is so funny to me. I mean, it's just I really get a huge kick out of it.
I do think in general, and this would be a summary or one summary statement on the show of okay, what do I think this show does well? And one of the things I think the series does really well is it throws everything against the wall. Like, it does not. I mean, and I don't mean that or dismiss or derisively. Like,
Sure.
it is not afraid to just barrel through story. It is not afraid to just kind of try whatever clearly comes to the writer's minds. Like, to your point, Reed, about Ashley Slashy the doll, like, or the puppet. I mean, and I guess in the spirit of that, what is so impressive is because of the nature of the threat of the series, this quote-unquote evil that can kind of manifest in any way, it all works. And that's what's really impressive. You can have a monster puppet. You can have, all the creepy monster effects. You can have deadites, and it all contextually works just because the threat is this generic kind of evilness.
Right. No, that's a really, really good point. Vera, what are your thoughts on Delusion?
I thought it was a really fun episode. I love Ashley Slashy, of course. I like that Ash's concern with Kelly breaking her fingers is that she's going to run out of them. Like, yeah, that's the problem there.
I hear that. I'm sorry to cut you off, but I hear that Dana, because that's obviously like a prosthetic that she's using, and she got so into that breaking fingers scene that she actually broke the device a couple of times. They couldn't reset it. They had to keep taking it out to be fixed and everything like that because she got so into it.
Well, she plays crazy really well.
She does. What another note that I have here is that I don't know why this pinged to me, but the episode is really very different from the rest of the show. But I feel like it was really smart in terms of progressing some of the themes that they're doing. One of the reasons that I think season 2 is my favorite overall season of the show is how, even though you have many different types of episodes and types of stories inside, they all kind of work together thematically. It's all rooted in this whole, back in his town, the perception of whether he's crazy or whether he's, humanity's savior or whatever. And they play with that in a lot of different ways. And I thought this was a really interesting way to pivot that and just really dive into Ash, being force-fed that he's in a mental institution because he actually killed all of these people. And Bruce Campbell had actually cited this episode as his favorite episode in the entire series run. Probably because he got to play all these different kinds of levels and everything like that.
That's interesting to me because I think this will be an easy bridge into episode 8. But initially, for the first half of this episode, more or less, I thought this is kind of a tired premise. Like, the middle of the series type of is the person really crazy type episode where, as a viewer, we're pretty confident that that's not the case. So it was a little slower to me in the initial sort of going of the episode. But what strengthens it is, one, the convention of Ashley Slashy the puppet and where they go with that.
Sure.
But two, kind of what episode 8 does for me personally. Episode 8 is very strong and kind of redeems whatever neutral feelings I had about the convention of is he or isn't he crazy. So
Sure.
I think pivoting into episode 8, if that's okay, Reed.
Well, let's check it. Vera, did you have anything else on 7?
I am fine to pivot into 8.
Let's do it. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, just episode 8, specifically titled Ashy Slashy. This is where you get a lot of really good, just cool imagery, like Ash in the military fatigues with the chainsaw against the wall type of stuff. Kind of cool stuff like that. And it's going to resolve the, has he been brainwashed or not type of stuff in this episode.
Yeah, this is an extremely strong episode. I mentioned in a previous conversation that the episode 4 of this season, DUI, is like top 5 for me. Right beside it, possibly topping it, is Ashy Slashy. I think this episode is absolutely outstanding. I think it's amazing. Before I just completely go off on how much I love this episode, Vera, your thoughts on Ashy Slashy?
I really love this episode as well, and I'm glad that Ashy Slashy doesn't end up being a figment of Ash's imagination or whatever spell Ball has him under. Like, I like that he's a real thing, but how does he move around with no puppet legs? He's so fast.
Well, and of the puppet, I love the line Kelly when she first sees him. She says, "I know I've seen some pretty disturbing stuff lately, but you are adorable." That's just a really great bit.
I do love it. One of the things I love about this episode, that Kelly versus, you're mentioning Kelly's interaction with it, their fight is so outrageously great. It's great.
When she walked into the room and the camera lingers on the bedpan, I was like, ew, why is it full of pee? And then they have this fight, and I was like,
enough.
Oh, that's why.
Nothing accidental about anything you see.
It's kind of like the jury in the morgue. You know?
Yeah.
Like, you know it's going to show up again.
Boy, does it ever.
That means something.
The thing I really like about this episode is there are, perhaps more so than other Ash vs. Evil Dead episodes, there's some really nice subtle call-outs to like the traditional slasher films. It's called Ashy Slashy, but like you mentioned earlier, Nathan, about him running the chainsaw along the wall.
Right.
That's a very Freddy move. Like, that's a very sort of, running along there. Plus, the way he sort of appears in the distance and everything really reminds me of like a Jason or a Michael Myers, that come in after them in that capacity. And I think that was very intentional on the crafter's part to really set up that sort of dynamic, only to pivot into one of my, if not my very favorite, reveal of the entire show, which like getting to that place where everybody's converging. Ruby, Kelly, Pablo, they've all made their way in. The sheriff and his daughter, Linda, like they're, some of them just getting completely eviscerated, but then all culminating in Pablo and Kelly and Ruby, and then you think that Ash is going to kill Pablo, and then it is revealed that he has actually been executing his plan, his ridiculous, nonsensical plan. That has been what he's been doing this whole time. I love that reveal. That when it happens, it just excites me every single time I see it. I love it so much.
Well, Reed, you may remember this. So I don't know if you want to. I would incorporate the very end of this episode here, but I won't for the moment. If you want to hold off on that, but I did text you. Yeah, I did text you. That was the moment. Was when he reveals the plan and it's all coming together. To me, I am approaching most of this series and franchise a bit cold. Like just kind of getting to know the world and all that sort of stuff. That moment is probably the first in the series of real exultant kind of like, that is really cool type of experience. Yeah. Once you believe that there's a pretty heroic moment for the team, it's a really significant moment for the show.
Absolutely. Vera, you have any, we're not ending right now because we've got one major thing to talk about at the end of this episode, but do you have anything else before we reveal the big stinger at the very end of this episode?
I love how Pablo kind of teaches Ruby how to be human in this episode. I think it's really adorable.
Yeah. Pablo has a lot of nice moments in this. He's got that nice moment between he and Kelly when they enter the hospital. It's almost like sweet. And then I like when they're out in the car, he's like, "Come on, go speeders!"
Yeah, that's great. That's great.
Everybody leaves him hanging, but like, oh man, Ray Santiago is so great in this. He's wonderful. And that
speaking of,
and that is why, like, you mentioned that. Why don't you tell us, Nathan, the full context for the note that you gave me?
Well, sure enough. So my note literally here says, "Pretty great heroic victory for the team when Ash's plan pays off." And I left it there once that gets revealed. And then they pinball or however pinball. They kind of incapacitate him or whatever, and Pablo is working his voodoo, and the stuff's happening. Well, if you're not going to watch the series, Ball, his weapon of choice up to this point, this demon character, is this elongated kind of fingernail that is, in earlier episodes, it rends people's skin from their bodies. It's pretty ridiculous and absurd and violent and grisly. Well, in the cacophony of all of this incantation and stuff going on, and there's, thunder and lightning or whatever, you as the viewers know, because the camera is important, tells you and shows you that Ball swipes at Pablo while he's above him. And it is even funny. I even caught it in the moment, but it just really wasn't clicking with me, the significance of what that would mean.
Yeah.
So they finish this incantation. Ball, the character, bursts in black goo. Everyone but Pablo is celebrating Pablo's, kind of mystical work that he just performed, and then Pablo's upper body falls off of his lower body, clearly marking him, for at least a little bit, as dead. And so my note just says, pretty great heroic victory for the team when Ash's plan pays off. Ellipsis. Never mind. I was like, oh, it was this really great exultant moment that bottoms out 30 seconds later.
Vera, did you watch this live? Did you watch this as it aired on Stars, or did you catch it in later, like when it came to Netflix or something?
No, we don't have Stars, so I had to watch it on Netflix later.
Gotcha. Well, so I had the good fortune to watch. Stars would do like a free preview, or like, hey, try it for a month on cable or whatever. And so I got to watch each of these seasons as they aired. When that ending happened, the first time Pablo died, I was like, like, you can't put me through everything that you just put me through and just literally slice one of my favorite characters in half. I cannot believe that they've just done this.
It's such a roller coaster.
It is, because I was like, and the way they react to it and everything, and then the way the next episode starts, which we're not getting into the next episode, but like, yeah, I really thought, I was like, oh my gosh, they can't have done this. I don't know who made this decision. I was sitting there, I was like looking up, like, is Ray leaving the show? Like, what's going on? Like, it was such a hard hitting moment for me, because that's such a thrilling episode until that final moment. And you're so right, it's such a roller coaster. It's completely crazy.
Yeah, my last note is just, Pablo, no!
Yeah, exactly. Isn't it amazing the level of storytelling they are able to integrate into it? Like, I'm thinking about this episode is 27 minutes long. It's only 27 minutes long, but so many things happen in this episode. And when I'm rewatching it, I find so many times I'm like, oh yeah, that must happen later, because we're almost to the end. Nope, it's right here.
Well, I think, Reed, you're identifying what I was alluding to earlier, but you articulated it better. Like, there's so, in the series itself, not just a singular episode like this one, though, yes, this one as well. There is so much story at work, and in a good way, in a cool way, and honestly, I think part of that is why the Pablo bisecting Pablo hits so hard is, now I am not to the end of the series yet, so I don't know how it completely resolves, though I'm not too far from it. But this is one of from where I'm at, one of the most poignant little turns in the series. I mean, it really is a bit emotionally weighty. You've really bought into this core set of characters. We're not yet to the moment where it gets really crazy in terms of the narrative.
Sure.
So no, this is a really great episode with a really great ending. I mean, a lot of them have pretty normal kind of send-off endings. This is a true cliffhanger in the traditional sense.
Yeah, it's absolutely wonderful. I guess that brings us to an end. Do you guys mind if I take us out?
Go for it.
Okay. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that concludes yet another installment of #TV Guideposts, brought to you by the Fear of God. Tune in next week, where unfortunately we will not have Vera with us, but we will have Ash with us, and we will see the conclusion of Season 2. We'll find out exactly how the gang deals with the aftermath of Pablo's devastating death, and how, if they have any further problems, how are they going to solve them? How are they going to get rid of evil once and for all? We don't know, but the show will tell us. So join us when we talk about Ash vs. Evil Dead, the conclusion of Season 2, and the premiere of Season 3 next week on #TV Guideposts.
You had a hard time ending that one, didn't you? I just love that you just